it's unfortunate that so many disordered eating behaviors in our culture are not only just normalized, but actually praised as like, oh my gosh, you're such the healthy one, right? You could
Yeah.
imagine a scenario where people at that gathering that you described maybe are looking at that person thinking, oh, and actually even saying, wow, you're just so good, you're so disciplined, you're so healthy, you're so mindful. And
Hmm.
really, like for that person in that scenario, it's really coming from this place of fear and an unhealthy relationship with food, but it gets sort of praised and therefore reinforced. I think that happens a lot of times with disordered eating behaviors in our culture. And it's, not helpful for the person who's experiencing it. It's also not helpful for all the other people who now believe that that's the way to be healthy, right? Is that you
Yeah.
have to be kind of doing these things and carrying your own food around with you, or being so rigid about it that you can't show up at a social gathering and confidently eat whatever happens to be there. Now, obviously, if you have a food allergy or a medical
Right.
condition, I'm not
Yeah.
talking about that.
What's up, you beautiful beasts? I'm Katie. I'm on a mission to help humans become their favorite versions of themselves and to strive for overall health by healing their relationship to food and exercise, healing their relationship to their body, and most importantly, healing their relationship to themselves, all without ever having to step on a scale. I have had the privilege to talk to all kinds of different humans who have been through a plethora of experiences just being a human and existing. I believe that every single time someone shares their story, at least one person listening will learn from it, be inspired by it, and maybe, just maybe, even change the entire direction of their life. These are the stories of humans unveiling their beautiful beast. Keep listening. This is the Unveiling the Beast podcast.
It's super nice to meet you. I'm actually really excited because of everything that you put in your what's your specialty answer. And
Yeah.
so can you tell myself and the listeners a little bit about who you are and
Mhm.
why you think you are who you are?
Sure, that's a big question. I am a registered dietitian and a certified intuitive eating counselor, and I basically, in my professional life, help people break up with dieting and diet culture, transform their relationship with food and their bodies, and learn how to practice gentle, flexible nutrition and lock in health promoting behaviors. Um, I landed on that kind of particular specialty when I first opened up my private practice after becoming a dietitian. I was working for a hot second with people who were focused on weight loss. I absolutely hated it. I hated talking about it. I felt like it was preying on people's insecurities, and I just didn't really like it. The few people that I worked with, that weight loss was the primary focus. I felt like they could be making all sorts of really awesome changes to their food, to their movement patterns, to their health habits. And if the number on the scale wasn't doing kind of what they had hoped, then they would say things like, Elizabeth, it's not working. And I would be thinking, oh my gosh, of course it's working. Like, let's run through all of the changes that you're making. Like, that's absolutely health promoting. So
Hmm.
I started to just see the disconnect between how people think about weight and health. And we tend to think of it as the same thing, and it isn't. And at the same time, I had children or kids, teenagers really, who were kind of mostly late middle school, early high school years. And I just started to see how many people around us had really fragile relationships with food and their
Hmm.
bodies, and how much disordered eating is normalized, and how many people were struggling with eating disorders, and how much of sort of that dieting lens overlaps with the disordered eating lens. And I just decided that wasn't how I wanted to approach food and health. And so I really moved into a weight inclusive approach that focuses first on having a healthy relationship with food and your body, and then working, or through that process, working on changing perhaps eating behaviors or um, health habits, but really coming at from a place of a healthy foundation and then really understanding the why behind your eating and letting it be body led instead of kind of rule led.
Yeah. I love this conversation because the book Intuitive Eating changed my entire life.
Really?
I've read it 3 times. My next step actually is to become a certified intuitive eating counselor. I'm not there
Awesome.
yet. But just the way it just shifted my entire mind.
Yeah.
And it came from a friend who said, "Have you ever heard of intuitive eating?" And I actually talked to her this morning. And I'm like, "You're part of my story, you know?" But
Yeah.
but it just the way it completely shifted my mind because I'm a personal trainer, fitness nutrition specialist, and I always felt like something was missing. And when I read the book, I was like, "This is what's missing. It's not that it's not that." So I used to say, "I don't understand. Like people know what to do. Why aren't they doing it?" And it's that whole just eat less and move more. And
Yeah.
the whole thing is that's not the answer. The answer is everybody is different. Everybody has different experience. Everybody has different traumas. Everybody has different DNA. And it's not just as easy as move more, eat less.
Yeah, I mean, our bodies are not linear math equations, right? As much as maybe we wish they were, they just aren't. And also, body diversity is real. Not everyone is meant to be in this certain specific size. And I think we do everyone a disservice when we approach it as if we are.
Yeah.
As if, there's kind of one right way to have a body. There just isn't. And there's not one right way to be healthy. And I think intuitive eating really is about just a more individualized approach, frankly.
Yeah. What do you say to the people who misunderstand intuitive eating and everything that it actually is versus what social media wants you to think it is? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it certainly does for people who know about intuitive eating because there's tons of misinformation out there. I think it's probably easier for me if I just go through a couple of the biggest misconceptions. So I think the first one is in an intuitive eating approach to food, it's all about rejecting dieting and giving one of the 10 principles is giving yourself unconditional permission to eat and enjoy food, as you know. And a lot of people take that to mean that we're just saying, eat anything you want, whenever you want, full stop. And we're not actually that wouldn't probably be very health promoting. What we're saying is you should be able to eat and enjoy any food you want with attunement to your body and its needs, and also without guilt, without shame, without kind of that diet culture stress and pressure. And the key is learning how to do it in a way that matches kind of what your body is asking for and your values and your taste preferences and your lifestyle. So I think a lot of times people think, oh, intuitive eating is just glamorizing, eating donuts and ice cream. No, we're advocating that those foods can be part of a health promoting diet, but we're not saying only eat ice cream and cupcakes or French fries or whatever. And I think the one piece that people miss is when we say unconditional permission to eat all foods, that actually includes lots of nutrient dense foods also. I think it's a testament to how deeply someone's restrictive mindset is that the first thing they think of is maybe some of those less nutrient dense foods. I think another misconception is, well, how can that be healthy if you're not focusing on weight, or if you are kind of encouraging people that they can eat those foods without guilt? Weight and health aren't the same thing. We just talked about it. There's loads of research that sort of dieting doesn't work. And the vast majority of people who do diet don't get the long-term sustainable results that they set out to get. And so we're really focusing on health promoting behaviors. And I always like to say health promoting behaviors may or may not lead to weight loss, but they're still health promoting. And so I think the more we can push back on that idea that, well, if it's not focused on weight loss, especially if it happens to be someone in a larger body, then it can't possibly be healthy. And that's not true. And I think the other misconception people have is that it's maybe intuitive eating is like giving up or letting yourself go because you're deciding not to intentionally pursue weight loss anymore if you go through and decide to try intuitive eating. And I always tell people that's not true at all. I actually think intuitive eating is harder in the beginning than following a diet, right? When dieting starts out easy, you have your set of rules, your motivation is high, your willpower is high, your hopes are high for what you're going to get. And you're checking off all the boxes, and it starts off really kind of easy. It's as you go along that it gets harder when your body starts resisting kind of under eating and or over exercising, when real life sets in and you it's not practical to count and track and measure what you're eating, when it's busy and stressful and you don't have time to spend that much like hyper focused time worrying about what you're eating. Intuitive eating is the opposite. It starts out probably hard because intuitive eating essentially is all about connecting with your body, trusting yourself with all foods, rejecting all the dieting rules and the calorie counts, and like really getting rid of all that. But those things run deep, right? So it takes a long time to clear away all the dieting noise. It takes time to rebuild that body connection that dieting has probably disrupted for you. It takes time to rebuild trust, to have certain foods in your pantry and know that you can eat them in a way that feels good. So it starts out hard, but then it gets easier as you go along, as you start to build trust, as you build that connection, as you're no longer so focused on the rules. So it drives me crazy when people say, oh, that's just the easy way out. That's not true at all. It's actually working really hard to opt out of a diet culture lens that probably isn't serving you in the first place. And it takes a lot of concentrated effort and time and patience and grace and fortitude and all the things to really stick with it until you get to that place where you are confidently eating and enjoying all foods and doing it, and also paying attention to your nutrition, but in a positive and empowering way.
Yeah. I love that you say it's hard at first, especially for people, like myself, for example. I was on a diet for 27 years. It's like, that's 27 years versus I learned about intuitive eating in 2019. So I can't do math right now, but like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 27 years versus 5, where I'm in a place where I've healed a lot of my battles with myself, and I'm not completely healed because I still have a lot of work to do. But I love.
I don't know if any of us ever are. I mean, we are still always living in diet culture. We're still always getting the messages that are equating our worth with our size or our looks or our appearance. And those beliefs, like I always like to point out to people, you don't actually even have to be a dieter to be very heavily impacted by diet culture. It's like the way that we view it's the lens through which we view food, your body, movement, having, your health in our culture. And so even if you've never done a diet, you may be really surprised at how many ways diet culture has impacted you and how many dieting behaviors you're using, even if you don't think of them as dieting behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend the other day post about a really hard workout that they did, and they're like, it was especially hard because today's a fasting day. I'm like, but you need to eat more.
Yeah, you need energy for that workout.
Yeah. So, but yeah, one of the things that you kind of sort of talked about was like this idea of good food and bad food. And a lot of people will argue, well, yeah, there's good food and bad food. There's stuff that's good for you and there's complete garbage. And what I've learned, like reading the book 100 million times, is it's not that like this thing's better for your body, right? This thing's probably better for your soul. I always say it's good for your soul or good for your body. But it's like an emotionally neutral looking at these two foods. I think the book uses an apple and apple pie as an example. So it's like looking at these things with an emotionally neutral emotions. Like one doesn't bring up guilt and one doesn't bring up Like, oh, I'm so proud of me for eating this apple. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah, it totally makes a lot of sense. And it matters because the way that you think about it impacts how you feel about it, which in turn impacts how you approach it and how you eat it. And if it feels like good or bad, or, like bad or junk or unhealthy, that's giving you this sort of restrictive or guilt inducing mindset around it. That's probably going to lead to eating behaviors that don't feel that good to you and maybe aren't that great for your overall well being. And you're absolutely right. We're not talking about, of course, some foods have more or less nutrients than others. It's not a statement about the nutrient density of a particular food. It is really a statement about food doesn't have any moral value. And you're not a good or bad person, whether dependent on whether you're eating carrots or whether you're eating a cupcake. And even if a food has less nutrient density, that doesn't mean that there's not a place for it in your life, right? It just means you just need to sort of know that going in and eat all of the foods mindfully and intentionally and in line with sort of your values for how you want to take care of your body. And yeah, the goal in stripping away the labels is to get to a neutral emotional playing field so that, it doesn't, the emotion isn't driving the choice. It's really the body attunement and your rational thought. Like we always talk about, intuitive eating is a blend of instinct, emotion, and thought. We kind of want to like find that sweet spot.
Yeah, totally. What's your experience with diet culture and like, do you have a story behind that, a personal story behind it on?
Yeah, I mean, well, like anyone, of course, I grew up in the same culture everyone else did. So for sure, like I'm probably more an example of I wasn't necessarily a dieter, but I, of course, absorbed all of the diet culture messaging, just like everyone else. For me, my experience was probably more, I don't think I thought about it at all when I was a kid or a teenager. I grew up in an Italian family. Food was always like a huge part of everything we did. And it was a very positive aspect of my life. I don't think I had an unhealthy relationship with food in my younger years. And even in college, I would say not really so much. But after, for me, it was more like early, well, probably like in my 20s, let's say, that I just really started to, in a different way, absorb some of the messaging, but it was more around exercise. So I definitely, like, throughout all three of my pregnancies, like I exercised really hard right up until basically the babies were born, and then like couldn't wait to get back in the gym. And I certainly didn't view it that way at the time. I thought I was just being healthy, but with hindsight, it was more of a disordered relationship with exercise. Like I was very afraid of my body changing through pregnancies and what I would look like. And that was sort of my way to try and manage it. So yeah, I guess that's my personal experience with it. And it really wasn't even until much, much later, where probably I had started to heal that anyway, just with time, that I really could look back and say, oh, that's totally what I was doing. And I didn't see it that way then. And I'm so glad I'm not there anymore.
Yeah, I love that. I'm trying to figure out how to word this next question. You mentioned that you grew up in a big Italian family. I'm actually Sicilian, but
Oh, cool.
I wanted to talk about the aspect of eating and different cultures and how, trying to figure out how to word it. So like people who are super into diets and obsessed with eating will go to a family event, for example, and bring their own food in a Tupperware and not allow themselves to experience the socializing, the eating. And not saying that you have to go to a family event and stuff yourself. That's not what I'm saying, but people will, bring the Tupperware and eat their chicken breast and rice and miss out on the culture. So what are your thoughts on that?
I guess my thoughts are, so much of the time it really comes back to the intention behind the choice. And in that scenario, if it's really coming from a place of fear around, oh, I can't eat the pasta at the family dinner because carbs are bad for you and it's automatically going to make me gain weight, and like you're getting in your head about it, then yeah, that is more a sign of disordered eating. And I think it's unfortunate that so many disordered eating behaviors in our culture are not only just normalized, but actually praised as like, oh my gosh, you're such the healthy one, right? You could imagine a scenario where people at that gathering that you described maybe are looking at that person thinking, oh, and actually even saying, wow, you're just so good, you're so disciplined, you're so healthy, you're so mindful. And really, like, for that person in that scenario, it's really coming from this place of fear and an unhealthy relationship with food, but it gets sort of praised and therefore reinforced. I think that happens a lot of times with disordered eating behaviors in our culture. And it's, not helpful for the person who's experiencing it. It's also not helpful for all the other people who now believe that that's the way to be healthy, right? That you have to be kind of doing these things and carrying your own food around with you, or being so rigid about it that you can't show up at a social gathering and confidently eat whatever happens to be there. Now, obviously, if you have a food allergy or a medical condition, I'm not talking about that. And I think we miss two things. I think we miss. One, I think in the diet culture world, or the nutrition world, or the wellness world, however you want to call it, we tend to think of it only in terms of how many nutrients is in a specific food, right? That's just the only thing that matters is food, it's fuel, and break it all down to like the nutrients, and is it, doing the most optimal thing for your body or not. And really, if you think about it, food is culture, it's connection, it's tradition, it's love, it's, all these really wonderful things that also have a lot to do with people's health and well-being, right? Culture, connection, community, all of those things can be health promoting. But if you can't do them because your diet is so overly rigid or restrictive, then that's taking away from your mental and your emotional well-being. And I think we just need to zoom out a little bit when we talk about food, nutrition, and health in general, to really look beyond just the straight nutrients, right? Of course, the nutrients matter, but it's not the only thing that matters. And if you're walking around with loads of stress about your eating, or loads of guilt, or loads of shame, or, it's preventing you from, going out and enjoying social experiences because you don't know what's going to be on the menu, and how are you going to account for that in your food journal, and how many calories or points are going to be in it. Well, that's creating stress that's there, then taking away from other aspects of your health. So we really need to look at that sweet spot. I call it, it's sort of a whole health approach. It's not just your physical health, but your mental and emotional health, and frankly, your social and your spiritual health. And where all of those things overlap, that if you imagine a Venn diagram, that's kind of the sweet spot of what's actually health promoting for any particular individual. And I just think it gets missed and lost. And there's so much fear mongering, and there's so much emphasis on just weight and not being able to think past it, that we miss the forest through the trees.
Yeah. I'm curious your take on, so as I've been learning about intuitive eating, probably like halfway through my adventure, I started to see another side of, another extreme side where it's almost been like cult-like. And so for my first red flag was I when I want to learn about something, I join a bunch of groups on Facebook and I just like dive into it until it's like in my body. But I was part of this group. Somebody posted a healthy recipe and they just in the comments were bashed. And I'm like, I don't get it. There's a whole chapter on nutrition. Like it's not like you said, it's not eating donuts all day and all that. So what's your take on this group? I'm not saying it's everyone. It's just a small handful
Yeah.
of people who have made it culty. That's the only word I can think of.
Yeah, no, I actually totally agree. I was just having this conversation with my podcast co-host earlier in the week. Um, I think a lot of people in the intuitive eating or body positivity or, that world, I think there is a lot of extremism, and I don't think it benefits anyone. Gentle nutrition, it is a principle of intuitive eating, and especially as a dietitian, like I don't agree at all with the people out there who talk about intuitive eating and say like, I don't care what you eat. I like, I don't really believe in that. I think nutrition is important. I just think
Yeah.
that there's a much more helpful way to approach it than the way that most people approach it. And I think if you're not also considering your relationship with food when you think about your nutrition, then you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And I think a lot of people can feel excluded from maybe some of the rhetoric around that because um, there you can encounter things like that. And I always describe intuitive eating is kind of like finding the middle way, right? Like it's not all or nothing, it's the middle way. And I think just overall in how we approach food, nutrition, and health, like I try to strive for the middle way. um, because I think that's usually more helpful for more people.
Yeah. Definitely emphasize listeners your relationship to food.
Yeah.
I was interviewing somebody the other day. I forgot her name. Uh, but she was talking about how she went on a 30-day sugar cleanse, and immediately my brain went, "Oh no, no, no."
Yeah.
But what came out of it for her was she's like, I learned that it's not that I need to cut all sugar out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to fix my relationship to sugar. And when she said that, I
Mm-hmm.
got the chills. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's so much about your relationship to the thing, your relationship to exercise, your relationship to yourself.
Yeah.
And when you can start healing that, it just changes your whole world.
Yeah, because then you're coming from a healthy foundation, right? And you're
Mhm.
able, I always kind of say self-care, not self-control. When you can approach your nutrition or your exercise or your stress management or any of your health promoting behaviors from a place of genuine self-care, like this is me, this is my body, I respect it, and I want to take care of it the best I can and know that
Mhm.
there's going to be seasons to that, right? Just because of life or whatever it is. But when you can get there, um, it actually makes it so much easier to do the things, right?
Yeah.
To have joyful movement or to choose nutrient dense foods or to talk to yourself nicely or whatever it is, because it's coming from a healthy foundation and it matters. I mean,
Yeah.
it matters anyway because it's how you show up in your life and your overall, mental and emotional well-being. But it actually, I believe, and I see it happen all the time with my clients, you're not like white knuckling your way through trying to make these changes because you have to burn so many calories or because you have to, make sure you eat certain foods. It comes from a place of genuineness. Like I
Mhm.
genuinely notice I feel better if I go out and get a walk in on a stressful day.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like tracking? So, and I asked this because for me, I was an obsessive tracker with
Mm-hmm.
calories. And then I discovered intuitive eating, and then
Mm-hmm.
I started tracking protein because I started
Mm-hmm.
lifting more heavy weight.
Mm-hmm.
And part of me was like, oh my gosh, I'm going back into diet culture. And then another part of me was like, no, I need to see how much protein I'm eating because I need the protein to
Mm-hmm.
rejuvenate my muscles after a hard workout. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's less of a question and more of it's really the intention behind the tracking.
Well, I think it's the intention behind it for sure, but it's also the impact of doing it. So, for example, if that's your intention to see, am I getting enough protein based on the amount of weight that I'm lifting, and you're able to look at that information neutrally and think, oh, today I didn't actually, maybe I didn't eat enough protein. Tomorrow I'm gonna add a couple of eggs to my breakfast, and it just ends there, then I don't really see anything necessarily wrong with that. If it becomes oh my gosh, now I didn't get enough protein today, and now you're going down this shame spiral or guilt spiral, or it's launching you into some sort of like very rigid, restrictive place,
Mm-hmm.
then the impact is probably not that helpful. It's kind of like when people get on the scale, right? A lot of times people say, well, I was feeling, well, I can't think of a specific example, but sometimes my clients will come to me and say, I was doing really good. I decided to get on the scale. I had a neutral reason for getting on it. I talked myself through it ahead of time, but then I got on it, and like my body image has been in the pits for the last 7 days. Then the impact wasn't that helpful, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would argue in either scenario, I mean, sure, you maybe could track protein in that scenario, but do you have to? Is that the only way you can figure out if you're eating enough protein to support your workout? I would probably argue no, that maybe you could do it for a couple days and then you sort of have an idea and you don't have to do it anymore. Do you have to step on the scale to figure out if your health promoting behaviors are working? No, not really. So yeah, I think it's about the intention and the impact.
I love that. Intention and impact. I talk a lot about intention, but never
Mm-hmm.
impact. So I love that.
Same with like if somebody's, like an Apple Watch or Fitbit or something like that that tracks your steps. I mean, I don't think there's
Mhm.
anything inherently harmful in that. I have a Fitbit. I kind of enjoy seeing how many steps I take. It does motivate me sometimes to get up and move when maybe it would have been really easy to sit on the couch, but it ends there. Like I'm not beating myself up if I don't do
Right.
it. I'm not thinking of myself differently if I do it, right? There's no moral value attached to it.
Hmm.
And it also doesn't send me into any kind of emotional or mental tailspin. It's just a neutral piece of information, just like
Yeah.
it could be a neutral piece of information. I don't know. I mean, what time did I go to bed last night? So
Yeah.
yeah, it just depends on the person and the circumstances. And the other quick thing that I would say about that is it very likely depends on where you are in your journey. If
Hmm.
you're very heavily in diet culture and coming out of it and moving over to intuitive eating, then yeah, maybe that's not the time to try to lean into pieces of data like that. But once you've gone through further and you're way more healed, then you might be able to invite it back in, and have it be okay. But it
Yeah.
really depends on the person and the circumstances.
I love that you mentioned steps because I like to track how many steps I'm taking. My son and I go to Six Flags twice a week. And
Oh
so
my goodness.
on those days we're like, okay, are we gonna do 23,000 like last week? And then
Yeah.
it's really cool to see how many steps we take.
Yeah, like if it's
But
just fun like that, then
yeah,
what's wrong with that?
yeah. Well, I have one last question for you that I
Okay.
ask at the end of every episode, and that is if you had one piece of advice that you could give to the world, what would it be?
Oh gosh. One piece of advice that I could give to the world. Um, I guess I would say love yourself. It starts there, and you deserve it.
100%.
You
And
can love yourself healthier and happier and more whole.
yeah. Mic drop.
Beautiful beasts, Elizabeth Harris signing off. Until next time.